Good morning again. Just to introduce ourselves to you a little bit more, my husband and I will be doing the sermon today. I'll do the first part and he'll do the last part. We are both school administrators. I'm an administrator at the university level at La Sierra University, and my husband is a principal at Loma Linda Academy, right where Loma Linda University Medical Center is. And so he has, in the whole school, there are about 1,200 students in that Adventist school. And in my school, we have about 2,300 students. So we think of things from the educational perspective and are always seeking to learn. As we have watched through the years and thinking about our readiness for Jesus to come, you know, we spend a lot of time looking at end-of-time things and looking at church doctrines, but sometimes we don't look enough at the things that can trip us up in our own lives. And one of the things that Jim and I have noticed is that one of the biggest barriers that people seem to face is the barrier of holding grudges in their lives. So let me tell you a couple of quick stories. There was a young woman named Sharon who was in the church youth group, and she really liked this young man named David, who was also in the church youth group. He seemed to be leading out and becoming a leader, and he was planning to prepare for becoming a pastor. And Sharon herself was a person who was a leader, and she was also very musical. Now, of course, that makes a very nice couple, right? So she began to dream. She dreamed about being a pastor's wife. He seemed to be showing some interest in her, and so her heart was kind of going pitter-pat. And she was praying a lot about this, praying that God would direct well in their lives, and that God would help her to see the way through, and also this David that she liked. She saw him showing a lot of interest in her, and so she was quite encouraged, and her friends would come and talk with her about it too. Oh, we see that he came over and he spent time with you at this event. And so she was really happy to see the interest that was being noted by her friends. Well, Sharon had to leave town for about a year to take care of some issues that were away. And during that time, she got a message from her brother that said, I think it's better if you hear this from me rather than someone else. But this young man that you like, David is dating Lisa. And she thought, Lisa? He's dating Lisa. And Lisa was the one who had been coming to her and saying, how is it going with David? It looks like things are going well. And so Sharon had confided in her friend, and now while she was away, her friend and David had started dating. And actually, in the end, they got married. Sharon felt very, very distressed, as you can imagine. She got more and more upset because not only had her dreams come to nothing, but her friend had betrayed her. And she got more and more angry in her heart. Not only angry at Lisa and at David, but also angry at God. A grudge began to build against these two friends of hers who she felt had betrayed her. Story number 2. Dr. Wong had come to the United States from Asia in the early 1980s. He had become a Seventh-day Adventist. By the way, both of these are true stories. He had become a Seventh-day Adventist because of the English language schools in his country. And he had eventually moved to the United States. He had gotten training. He had gotten a master's degree in religion, and then he went on to get 2 different doctorates, one in psychology and one in sociology. And at that time, then he was hired into an Adventist school to be a professor. Now, he was the only Seventh-day Adventist in his family, and his family was really quite upset with him because Dr. Wong had potential in his own country, and they couldn't understand, number 1, why he became this strange Seventh-day Adventist, and number 2, why did he go to work in a university that did not have a big name, and he was just a faculty member there, and they felt that he could have done more. Oh, and to add even more troubles, he was not making very much money because he was working in an Adventist school. So he felt a lot of pressure from his family. There came a time when the department chair position of his department opened up, and he applied to become the department chair, but another person was chosen. It was very disappointing for him because he had hoped to show his family that he was progressing in his career. And then another position some years later came open as the dean of his school in his university. And he applied for that position, and he was not given it the first time. And then it came open again later, and he applied again. And this time, the people on the search committee were friends of his. And they said, of course, we want you to lead in this school. When the recommendation went to the university administration, the recommendation was for him to become the dean. The other person who had applied was well qualified, but he didn't think that, he heard from his friends that that person's presentation had not been very good during the search process. So he was sure that he had it. He even told his family that his name was being sent to the university administration to become the dean of this school. And then disaster happened. The university administration did not accept the recommendation of the search committee, and instead they chose the other candidate who had much more experience, but whose presentation had not gone so well and didn't have as much research as Dr. Wong had. He was devastated. Not only had his friends' recommendations been turned down, but now he was losing face with his family, who once again were in the questions of, why are you being a Seventh-day Adventist? Why are you working in this place that doesn't recognize your talents? And why have you been rejected as a leader? And it was very, very hard on him. In fact, as he started working with the new person who came in, he was holding a very deep grudge. And it was eating him up. He felt the sense of shame. His thoughts were sour and critical. He was not sleeping well. He worked even longer hours to prove his value, that he should have been the one who was chosen. He hated the sight of the new dean who had gotten that job instead of him. He solicited his colleagues' bitterness against the new administrator as well, and so they made it harder for the new person who came in. It caused a division between him and colleagues who wanted the new administrator. There were some who did and some who didn't. And students began to sense that something was not quite right. Think about what could have been if Dr. Wong had put the good of his school above his own aspirations and disappointments. Perhaps it could have coalesced better and been a stronger school that he was working in. What if he had turned to God for healing instead of voicing his disappointment and his criticism? What might have been for his own health in terms of living with an open heart? The Oxford Dictionary defines a grudge as a persistent feeling of ill will or resentment resulting from past insult or injury. Have you ever had a persistent feeling of ill will or resentment resulting from past insult or injury? I have, and so I'm speaking from personal experience as well. I think those who wrote the Oxford Dictionary should have added, resentment which divides people unnecessarily for long periods of time most deeply hurts the one who cherishes the grudge and accomplishes nothing. That's really what a grudge does. It accomplishes nothing, even though it is built up to be self-protective. So in my 20 years as a university administrator, I have been struck by how many people in that environment hold grudges. And I suspect the same thing happens in churches and for people who work in hospitals. I've noticed how much damage is done as they tightly hold on to the offense. And I've been very interested as I studied about grudges. The Bible addresses the issue of grudges 5 times. One of them you saw in our scripture reading this morning from Leviticus. But let me quickly take you through the tour of the 5 times. The first time happens in Genesis, where the Bible says in Genesis 27:41 that Esau bore a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed Jacob. Was wrong done to Esau? Yes, it was. Did Esau have to bear a grudge? Not necessarily, but we can understand it, right? His blessing had been taken. The second biblical mention of grudge holding refers to the sons of Jacob. When Joseph was in Egypt and the sons of Jacob came to get food to take back during the famine. In Genesis chapter 50, verse 15, it says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph bears a grudge against us and pays back in full for all the wrong we did to them? However, when you read the story of Joseph in Genesis, you realize that he showed absolutely no sign of bearing a grudge against his brothers. Did you notice that his brothers sold him into slavery? Was there reason for Joseph to hold a grudge? Absolutely. There was every reason in the world. And yet the Bible says that Joseph did not bear a grudge against his brothers, and in fact took care of them. We see grudges addressed again in Leviticus in the text that we had this morning that says, you shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself, says the Lord. Do not hate, the verse says. Do not bear a grudge. That seems very clear to me, and it also seems very difficult to do. David, the king of Israel, wrote about grudges in a psalm. He said, they bring down trouble upon me, and in anger they bear a grudge against me. That's from Psalm 55. He was feeling the hurt of being on the receiving end of those who bore a grudge against him, and probably was talking about Saul and the grudge that he was bearing against David. Then there is another grudge text that is in the New Testament, and this has to do with John the Baptist. You remember that John the Baptist had spoken to Herod and said, you have done the wrong thing in your marriage. You should not be married to this woman who is your brother's wife. And in Mark 6:19-20, it says, Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to put him to death, and could not do that, for Herod was afraid of John. So this woman who had participated in wrongdoing and then had John the Baptist, the prophet, had pointed out the wrongdoing, held a grudge against John the Baptist for speaking openly about what she had done wrong. That is a shame-inducing thing. When someone points out you're wrong, you feel shame. And there are some of us then who turn the shame of having our wrongdoing pointed out, we turn that into a grudge and we hold it against the person who called us to a better way. So is that understandable? Yes, for me it's understandable. When someone points out something I've done wrong, it is very easy, especially if it is pointed out publicly, it is very easy to build a grudge because of the shame that I feel if I have done something wrong. Well, it did not end well for John the Baptist. As you know, he was put to death because of the grudge of Herodias. I have looked up I've shared the 5 stories, but there is also some research that shows the effect of grudges. Psychology has been looking into these areas. There was a study that was done in Singapore, very fascinating, by psychology researchers. And they asked people to recall a situation for which they still held a grudge against the person who offended them. Then they were asked to estimate the slope of an angle in photographs, various photographs. The idea was to bring to mind the idea that they were climbing a steep hill, and the people, they found in this study, the people who had not let go of their grudges estimated the slopes to be steeper than the people who did not have grudges. So that grudge affected their perception of the difficulty that one would have climbing that hill in the picture. The researchers described it in their write-up in the research as similar to wearing emotional backpacks on your back, as if you're carrying a heavy burden. In fact, they found that after they controlled for other factors such as fitness, they found that the people who thought about their grudges, they did some other research, and they found that they asked people to jump. And after they controlled for the factors for fitness and so on and so forth, the people who held grudges could not jump as high as the people who did not hold grudges. And this was after they controlled for all the other things that might be factors in that. So it affects your physical performance, it affects your mental perceptions. I also found that in the research, it's very clear that grudges, people who do grudge holding have a hormone, a stress hormone that is produced, and it inhibits the production of oxytocin, which is the love hormone. So when you're holding a grudge, it is even harder to show love to other people because it affects the hormones in your body that cause you to be able to be loving toward others. It has also been linked to an increase of cardiovascular disease, pain disorders, and stomach ulcers. All of these have links, correlations, links. It doesn't mean that it causes it, but it has the link in the research to grudges. And then sometime in the last year when I was looking up the research, I found, but I haven't been able to find it again, but they said that it was a study saying that people who held grudges were more likely to experience dementia in old age. I went back and tried to find that, and I wasn't able to find the study, but I still mention it because I think it's such an interesting concept. The point is, holding a grudge is not only destructive in human relationships, holding a grudge is not only seen by Bible writers as something that leads to no good whatsoever, but holding a grudge is also clearly indicated in the scientific research as having a significant negative effect on both your physical and your mental health. And now Jim will continue.
Good morning. Well, Ginger has shared several things with you. Sad stories from today and sad stories from the Bible. She's also looked at the impact of grudges on our health and on our ability. So we really need to start taking a look at, can we get out of that? Can we drop our grudges? Because it can be very difficult. As she said, holding the grudge itself inhibits our ability to do the opposite, to show love and to do those things that would help us get out of the grudge. So I want to look at a couple of things, and this is, well, actually I'll give you 4 ideas that may help. Let's hope they help, because most of us are going to face this at some point if you're not already struggling with it. First of all, I want to go a little deeper on God's attitude towards grudges. You looked at the verse in Leviticus 19, but I want to point out that that comes right in the middle of what is really a relisting of the 10 Commandments. It's amazing. When you take a look at the rest of that chapter, it's all on personal holiness. It starts with respect your mother and father and continues to list, don't put your trust in idols or make metal images of gods. Don't steal. Don't bring shame on the name of your God by using it to swear falsely. Do not rob your neighbor, and keep my Sabbath days of rest. It's really a restatement of the 10 Commandments, and right there in the middle of it, it says, don't hold a grudge against other people. So I think it's pretty clear that God doesn't see that as a good thing. The other problem is that when we're holding a grudge, it makes it a lot easier to break the rest of the commandments. The 10 that we normally look at that does not mention grudges specifically, it's pretty clear that it's easier to murder somebody if you're holding a grudge, right? A little harder to murder in cold blood, as they say. It's easier to not honor our mother and father if we're holding a grudge against them. It's easier to commit adultery if we're holding a grudge against our spouse. It's easier to covet other people's goods if we're holding a grudge against the wealthy and those people who don't deserve any more than I do. See, covetousness and all the rest are tied up in this. It's also easier if we're holding a grudge against God to put other things before him, to misuse his name, and to not honor his special day. So holding a grudge affects our ability to keep all of the commandments. And it's really important then to see that God doesn't just expect us to drop our grudges, he commands us to do so. It's written very clearly there in Leviticus 19. In fact, Jesus, when he says, well, you've heard it said, but I say, and then he took all of those commandments deeper, he did the same thing with grudges, because he said in Matthew 6:15, for if you forgive men when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. Can that really be true? Our forgiving and loving God, there's something that he's not going to forgive. There's an attitude in our hearts that causes him to say, very well, I cannot forgive you as well. It's kind of a shocking verse. But now I want to tell you some ways to get free. And surprisingly, one of them will be the very fact that God commands it. And we'll see how that gives us power in a minute. We can think that it's unfair that God would tell us to lay down a grudge. We might want to say to him, as Job might have, God, this person has done me wrong. Why don't you fix it? Why don't you punish them? Then maybe they'll come and ask for my forgiveness, and then I can be big-hearted and forgive them. And then everything will be right. But we don't often get that opportunity. They go on happily, looking like they have no idea that they have offended us so, and we're tempted to just hang on to that grudge for a long time. So how do we get over that? First, be realistic. Being hurt does not automatically result in holding a grudge. Being hurt is not automatically tied to holding a grudge. Sometimes we feel that way, but it's not true. Holding a grudge is a choice, and it's a pretty ineffective one. You want proof of that? Your child is running through the house and he breaks your favorite plate. Are you sad that your plate was broken? Absolutely. Are you going to grieve the loss of that plate? Probably so. Are you going to hate your child? Probably not. It's not automatic that one injury done to you is going to cause you to hold it against somebody in the long run. Want more proof? Your finger causes you pain because it got too close to the fire. So that pain is bothering you. What do you want to do now? Get even with your finger? Maybe bite it or do something else mean to get back at it? Teach it a lesson, hurt it back? That's ridiculous. We don't do that kind of thing. And yet, how often do we punish a member of our family or a member of the church or a member of the community because of something they did that hurt us? It still doesn't make any more sense because Paul says that we're all members of one body. And so if we would not punish one part of our physical body because of what it's done to us, why would we punish one part of our social body for what they have done to us? Now, certainly, Leviticus 19 and Matthew 18 tell us to confront the person who has done us wrong. We are to do that. We're not to just say everything's okay and sweep things under the rug. We are to go back and to say, look, here's what you did and here's how it's made trouble for me. But the choice to repent is always theirs. They may do so and they may not. Once they've made their decision, it's really out of our hands. And so if they have decided to repent, we can reconcile and things get better. If they decide not to repent, we have a choice then to nurse a grudge or to live in a freer way and to not let them continue to hurt us because we've chosen to pick up that backpack of grudge holding. Why would we cooperate with them in making us feel worse by holding a grudge against them? That doesn't make sense either. So again, injury or insult does not have to lead to bitterness or grudge holding. The truth is we suffer many injuries and disappointments in life that never lead to a grudge. So you might want to ask yourself, why is it you're choosing to hold a grudge in a particular setting? It's a good question to ask, and I don't have an answer for you on that because I'm going to move on to the second point here. So the first one is, holding that grudge is a choice. The second one is, know that when God commands us to do something, in fact, anytime God commands, he creates. Have you thought of that before? When God commands, he creates. The earliest commandments that God gave in the Bible are shown to us in the book of Genesis, where God commanded there to be light, and there was light. He commanded the air and the soil to separate, and it did. He commanded there to be planets and stars, and there were. For plants to grow, and they did. For animals to appear on the land and earth and in the sea, and they appeared. The natural world responded to his voice. His will formed reality. That natural law that he created was an expression of himself, just as his moral law would later be. Finally, he made us in his image, and then he rested. He rested from commanding and creating. Why? It was our turn to create and to choose. In truth, we're the only creatures that are capable of considering his desires and then choosing to ignore them and insult him. But what was his first moral command to us? Be fruitful and multiply. And I have not heard anybody complain about that commandment. Now consider this. What God has commanded cannot really be broken. Have you thought about that? We can't actually break his law, either his physical or his moral law. We cannot break those. Those are manifestations of his character. All we can do is ignore them, and they end up breaking us. We can ignore, for instance, the law of gravity and jump off a tall building. The law of gravity will not be broken by our foolishness. We will be broken. When we commit adultery, we're not breaking the law, we're breaking us, because the law is. And when God commands something, he's simply saying, here's a picture of reality, here's the way things should be. He's not trying to control us, he's trying to enlighten us. Similarly, we can't hold a grudge and expect to have joy and good health. So third, consider the word let that God used in creation. He said, let there be light. And try putting that in the place of the commands that he's given to us. Let us drop the grudges. Let us go on into forgiveness. For Jesus said, forgive and you will be forgiven. Give and it will be given to you. This is in Luke 6:38. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over would be poured into your lap. We can't outgive God. Whatever we surrender will be more than repaid in his time. When we let God have his way and we let him put our minds on better things, we begin to experience joys that we'd lost long ago. Our life begins to unknot and to straighten out. We find freedom to think of brighter things. It's all his work. We just have to allow it. We have to allow those things to fall aside and for our own body chemistry to come back in line with what he designed to begin with. And finally, the fourth thing, let God right-size that person for you. Whoever you might be holding a grudge against, let God make that person the right size. And there are two ways he does this. First, he can show you that that person is so much bigger than the problem they've created for you. Their life contains many of the same loves, fears, dreams, and disappointments as your own life does. I remember a student that I had, his name was Greg, and he was autistic. And he was in big trouble. I had told him, you do that one more time and you're going to have to leave the school. He did it one more time, another fight. And I said, Greg, I'm sorry, but we have this contract. And he was in tears. He did not want to leave. He didn't have full control over his emotional reactions. And he wrote me a beautiful letter telling why he was repentant and how deeply he repented. And he ended the letter with a typo. He had a sentence where he meant to say, it will never happen again. But he left off the T in the first word, and what he wrote was, I will never happen again. And I thought, that is true. And the profoundness of that hit me. I thought, Greg is not a problem, he's a happening. And that happening will never happen again. He's bigger than the problem that he presented to me. I went against my own law, gave him a new try, and thank God he was able to finish the year, and he did well from that point on as far as fighting goes. On the other hand, another way God right-sizes that person is sometimes he shows you they are so much smaller than the monster you have created in your own mind. Ginger told me one time of a boy that had just been making trouble for her in class, and one day she saw him out on the playground and noticed how scrawny he was and how frail he was and how it suddenly hit her. I have allowed him to rule my classroom, but he's just a fragile little person. And sometimes when we allow God to do this, he will show us the frailty of that person who has hurt us and how they are also passing. In time, their life will be gone, and if they die without repentance, they are to be seriously pitied. So in summary, holding grudges always messes up the story. Holding grudges messes up our health and our well-being. Holding grudges is our choice, and it only hurts us. God commands us not to hold grudges, and yet his commands are simply descriptions of how things work. When God commands, he creates a way for the commandment to become true in our lives. So we need to let his command become true for us, to let him lead us away from bitterness and on to generosity and joy. And finally, we need to let God right-size that person for us, to point out that the one who hurt us is so much bigger than the problem they've created for us, and yet so much smaller than the monster we have seen them to be. We must see their frailty. With God's help, we can not only forgive the one who hurt us, we can become generous in our understanding of them. We can forgive and we can give. Then God will forgive us, and he will give back so much more than what we have